Hello and welcome to this episode of the AML Clinic Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Clement, a former SRA AML regulatory manager, now working with firms to build defensible frameworks grounded in how the SRA assesses risk and decision making in practice. In this episode, we're focusing on AI and specifically what it means for client onboarding and AML in practice. Over the past 15 to 20 years, legal services have moved from paper based processes to digital systems and then into automation. AI represents a further shift, one that changes how information is processed, interpreted, and presented. And that shift is particularly visible in client onboarding. Tasks that once took hours, reviewing documents, extracting key information, forming an initial view, can now be completed in minutes. And that introduces efficiency. It also introduces new questions. And to explore this further, I'm joined by Arik Oslerne. Arik is the Chief Executive Officer at Steward. He leads the firm's commercial and operational teams supporting global asset managers, professional services firms, and banks with their AML and KYC needs. Prior to founding Steward, Arik was part of the management team at Vauban, steering its acquisition by Carter in 2022 and then led Carter's EMEA fund services. Before that, Arik was COO at Divisa Capital, head of legal at Alpari, and an associate at PwC. Arik is also a qualified solicitor of England and Wales and holds an MBA from London Business School. Arik, you are welcome to the AML Clinic.
No, thank you. Thank you for the introduction as well. Great to be here.
Thank you for coming. So, Arik, as I mentioned in my intro, if we look at how technology has evolved in legal services or any services over the last 15 to 20 years, there's been quite a clear shift from digitalization to automation and then now into AI. And from your perspective, I just wondered what feels different about this phase and why does AI feel more fundamental than the previous shifts?
No, it's a great question. And it's interesting having built onboarding systems in multiple firms before, how things have changed. If we look back like 15 years ago, it was a lot about how do we move data in a digital format and how can we connect information and make decisions quicker. So I've been in industries where we do STP onboarding. So it really means that someone can be onboarded automatically without anyone in the loop. And that was an amazing innovation. And that really was important when you think about how like digital banking works today, firms like Revolut and other places like
Mm,
that. And that was always a very logic-based approach in terms of how onboarding worked. The big difference that's come forward, and I think it started not with AI, but let's go back even, um, you know, 5, 7 years ago, was bringing machine learning into the process. So this was now not necessarily rule-based, but it was based on looking at specific indicators and making decision on those behaviors to reach results. And that was quite a shift, but it was still I say, a moderate shift in terms of decision making. Where things started getting really interesting is when AI came into this world. Suddenly, there's a massive rethinking of actually what does decision making look like, because now we're talking about shifting away even the first line of defense in some instances and making conscious decisions about whether or not someone should be onboarded or not onboarded. And it's a massive shift from the digital process and a very big shift from the machine learning process. It's now really kind of letting a new piece of technology really be at the forefront.
but it's very interesting to watch. A great time to be alive. So focusing specifically on the AML, where do you see AI adding the most practical value today?
So what's interesting is that there are a lot of processes today which happen in a very manual way. So teams are manually reviewing documentation, they're filling out forms. There's a lot of human intervention, which
Mm,
isn't necessarily a high value intervention. It's a very procedural intervention. It
yeah.
is really checking the box on many things. This is where I think AI can really drive a lot of value for teams, because what they should be doing, they should be taking a risk-based approach. They should be spending their time on the high value reviews and checks and almost kind of doing what the firms were doing many years ago around STPing simple or low risk onboarding, I think those are the kind of the cases where AI is actually really good at. It's like, look, if you have this checklist, why don't I do that first review of that checklist, provide you analysis review, real-time and quick support for recommendations, so teams can actually spend their time going, wait a second, let me have a think about this. Let me decide if this is a risk I should look more into or look less into, and become less of a doer and more of an operator and an oversight function.
Right. We're going to talk about being more of a operator and less of a doer, and the risk that might come along with that. So, just a quick follow-up question for me. In practical terms, if AI allows a firm or a person to take something that would have taken them hours and compress it into minutes, how should they be thinking about what changes in their workflow now?
Yeah. So I think if we take it down to like a real life example, something in Steward
Mhm.
we do a lot and help clients with. I think it's probably one of the biggest problems we see clients hit a wall with, and that's around screening. So obviously, any firm has to go through some form of screening of their underlying clients. They're looking
Yeah.
for sanctions, PEPs, and adverse media.
Mhm.
And today, what happens is you use a really good system. There's many out there where it provides you, right, these are all the sanction lists, these are the potential PEPs, here's the potential adverse media we found. And if it's a very common name, you're
Yeah.
spending hours going through a long list, clicking through step by step. Who is this person? Is this really the person I've been looking at? And unfortunately, there hasn't been a way to manage that until now. So on
Mhm.
Steward, for instance, what we do is we do a first run through the mill, going through checks and going, wait a second, we have a little bit more data on this person. We know who they are, their date of birth, where they're based. So we can actually make a supporting kind of recommendation saying, actually, this isn't the same person. This isn't the same location. You probably don't want to spend your time going through 300 checks like this. Spend the time on the hits, because that's really what matters. Now, if you go back to your question, so what does that mean in terms of my day? Well, and how I kind of approach the workflows. I don't need to spend that energy kind of going through 300 clicks. I should be using my oversight function, reviewing it, just seeing, do I feel comfortable with the explainability here? It is obviously not a match, and then really spending my time and energy on the actual hits. So it's really changing the way I kind of interact with technology, with my work, and I think screening is a great example of that.
So it's about rebalancing where the judgment is applied.
Absolutely. I think what we find is that the human brain, especially in the AML world, is being kind of refined to just look at data and see, does it fit a box?
Mm.
And what the skill you really need is supposed to be like a detective. You really should be there kind of thinking about, is there something that I should be spending my time, my energy on? Can I just dig into this a bit deeper? It's really hard when you don't have that. When you're doing like, hundreds of onboardings, you don't have that time.
Mm. So no doubt AI would make the process more efficient, but there's a potential argument around efficiency versus caution. So where would you say firms need to be more careful when introducing AI into their processes?
It's a really interesting question. I think that firms don't know or don't understand how to best implement. I think they
Yeah.
know there's a change happening. I think for law firms, for example, they're seeing the benefits of systems like Harvey and
Hmm.
Legora and other types of legal tech. They haven't yet been able to see that value come into other parts of their business, such as AML, and they don't know how it can be adapted. And the risks are pretty significant. Like, and this is something where people need to really spend their time and energy thinking, like, when does AI work really well? Where did it
Yeah.
not work really well? And if you think about at least how we adopt it, we need to think about, this is not a black box. What should happen is you need to narrow the context window to a very specific task. So
Mm.
if we're looking at, for instance, documentation, if you throw in a document into an LLM and say to it, look, can you read this and tell me what the risks are?
Mm.
The results will be okay, but it's not going to be great. The reason is the context window is too big, the issues are too wide.
Yeah.
What firms like Stewart do is we narrow that context window to very specific tasks, dealing with very specific issues. So we say, wait a second, what does this document relate to? This is related to let's say um, a company extract from France of this type of entity type. We know these entity types. We know what we expect to see in these entity types. AI, help us with this predefined rules to make sure that this is the right type of documentation and there's no risk or fraudulent measures or indicators that we know should be avoided. And that helps really narrow the risk profile. And I think what people need to be careful of is that kind of like just throw everything into the system and hope the good results come out, because they won't. That's where you'll have issues arise.
Yeah, absolutely. Where there's an over-reliance, false confidence in, especially as you said, if you've not actually narrowed it down to the correct context.
And the AI is amazing and make you feel that, yeah, this is absolutely correct. We're absolutely 100% sure this is correct. And it's very hard to kind of go, oh, actually, is that right? Should I agree with it?
Exactly. Okay, so I was just thinking, when someone's reviewing a file, so for example, when I do audits, when I complete audits, I'm not just reading the information, I'm actually interpreting it and forming a view. So if AI is summarizing that initial process that a person would have gone through, do you think it better supports judgment? I'm speaking specifically in an AML context. Or does it risk shaping the way people interpret the information before they've actually fully understood it themselves?
Yeah, it's a really deep problem set. And I think it's about how we almost need to rewire our brain a little bit. And I think that I always give this example when I was a trainee. I used to rely heavily on this system called practical law. And the partner I remember one time, partner kind of pulled me up and was like, this research you did for me, where do you get the answers from? I was like, I took it off practical law. And it's like, well, that's not the right thing. You need to go to primary sources. You need to kind of do the heavy lifting. You need to understand. You need to think about it. And I think that the analogies are really similar. So I think
Yeah.
about how, do I copy and paste the results from summary, an AI summary, or am I thinking about it? And is it helping me make that decision better? It's reducing the time for me to do research, but it also requires me to kind of think a little bit about, wait a second, that's great, that's true, but I can still go back to the JMSG guidance and have a think about the problem set and research it more, or even use AI tools to help me kind of analyze that problem set better. And I think we need to be careful not to be slaves to judgments and like be able to think about And I think this is particularly important for like the more junior people that haven't had to use the critical thinking parts, and to make sure they can actually make critical decisions and understand and almost like test themselves against it. Like, have you thought about, especially when you're dealing with more high risk, have you thought about the impact of this decision and what it means? Have you read it? Have you reread it? And I think that's a really critical part of that equation. And I hear a lot in the tech world, people say to me, well, Claude told me to do this, or ChatGPT told me to do that. I'm like, oh my words.
Right.
Like, if we're at this stage, like, what does it mean for humanity? But I think it's important to if we all suddenly became, level set it against a specific model, that we're all going to think the same. I think that the ingenuity, the creativity comes from us. Like we can't, just follow through on what we've been told. We need to use our brain and think about it.
Absolutely. The AI can't take responsibility for a decision or fully understand the context in which that decision sits. So I absolutely agree with all of those. Um, we're seeing a very different approach across the market. So some firms are very cautious, others are experimenting actively. Some are embedding AI quite deeply into their workflows. So 2025 seems quite noteworthy. So I'll give some examples to give context to my question. 2025, the SRA approved the first quote unquote AI law firm. A number of firms announced how they're working with AI. Fenchurch Law announced in June it was using AI, as far as I understand, to build AI versions of their lawyers. Kingsley Napoli, July 25, announced a collaboration with legal tech to develop a first of its kind knowledge exchange. Charles Russell Speechley announced that they adopted Harvey. Cleary acquired Springbok AI to create custom AI-powered solutions. And this goes on. How do you see that spectrum playing out in practice? Would you say there are more firms using AI, or more are still watching on the sidelines just to see what happens?
So we work with very forward-thinking firms. They're the firms that want to delight their customers. But we also work with firms in their kind of risk departments where they're very centered on risk and making sure that they can demonstrate, stand behind their responses. I would say that across the board, I've not come across a firm that hasn't been intrigued to see how AI can support their processes.
Right.
There's a lot of also question marks about how the regulators may look at that as well.
Yes.
And I think that's a really critical point to kind of just kind of go back to and just think about, like, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean? How the regulators are actually looking at AI and the adoption across not just the UK? We should look also abroad and see kind of what are other countries, how are they adopting or adapting to this world. So starting with that, I'd say, like, look at the FCA, for example, which is, I think, a good starting point. They've been very open to AI, and we see this with their sandbox. They're like encouraging firms to come use, think about it, play with it, to make sure they can feel comfortable with how AI is adapted. I also look at the US. It was really interesting. So FinCEN, the AML authority out there, they brought through some consultations around how they think about AML going forward, and within that they say, when we carry out enforcement actions, we're going to look at firms, and part of the considerations for whether we enforce or not is how they're using automated tools, including AI. So they put it in writing there. They're expecting firms to kind of be ahead of the curve and making sure they're using risk measures to ensure they can be ahead of potential fines. So I think that's a really important, that helps teams kind of go, well, look, my regulator's on board with this. I should probably spend my energy looking into this because I don't want to be behind the curve, as I was saying. And I think specifically with law firms, it's very interesting that because they've been pushed by their clients to show more efficiency, they have been adopting it on their core work around, like, their legal work. So I think it filters down very quickly. Like, well, if the lawyers are using this, we should be using it on the risk teams as well, so we can also demonstrate how we're ensuring the firm's more efficient and driving better outcomes for our clients.
So you kind of preempted my next question, which I'll just hold fire on. Just to add into what you just said there, the SRA has published guidance on its website about practical tips for firms taking on new technology, which includes AI on its website. So I'll link that in the show notes for anyone who hasn't seen it. So there's almost an expectation that firms are using it, and if you're using it, this is what you should be doing to be using it safely. Right. So to bring everything we've touched on together, for a firm, so assuming I'm in a firm that's now very new to AI, I'm exploring, or even if I'm a firm that has been using AI already, what would you say the focus should be on to ensure that it's used in a way that's effective, it's proportionate, and it's defensible? So my regulator or AML supervisor is going to come knocking. What do I need to make sure that I have right?
So I think what's missing a little bit is kind of a guide for firms on how to adopt AI safely and proportionately. I think, like, what are the questions I'm asking for my vendor? What should I know? Like, what is
Yeah.
right? What is wrong? I think people don't have, like, a set list of questions. I think that's the starting point, is understanding what is the critical pieces that will help a regulator feel comfortable when they do an audit.
Yeah.
And I'd say there's two critical points to that. The first thing is, and this would be a no-brainer, but audit trails. Like, just show
Absolutely.
how a decision's been made and make sure it's very clearly documented. And I think it's something which is obvious, but not necessarily obvious with vendors about how
Yeah.
AI plays a part in that. So all decision making we do is good. There is immutable logs to make sure we can show how decisions were made. The second thing, which is really important, I think this kind of covers the point you brought up earlier around whether this is a recommendation or how do you use this. It's really important that AI provides explainability, or the firm provides explainability of how AI is being used and the outcomes of why it's recommended or suggested a potential action. And for example, when we do screenings, we use that very clearly. We put a kind of a context window where we explain this was identified as a false positive because it was a different jurisdiction or was a different person. And it's really first helpful the person doing the work to understand like why a decision's been made. But if you're going to, the regulator's going to come in and go like, why did you agree to this decision? It
Mm.
was wrong, let's say, God forbid, but like, why did that happen? You could go, look, this is why this happened. This is the log. This is the audit trail for that. I think
Yeah.
it's really important to have those two points really nailed.
Yeah, absolutely. So I couldn't tell you how many times I went to audit a firm and you'd look at an electronic verification report and it would say something on there and you'd say to the firm, do you understand what this means? And actually, no, the report turned it out, so it must be true. They actually don't understand what it was that it was checking, which, believe it or not, happened more times than I would like it to have happened. Um, but yeah, I think it's been a really insightful discussion. I think training as well, I would add onto that, is really important. If you're going to take on any new piece of technology, it's important that people understand how to use it, given the example I just gave. But is there anything that you would like people to know about AI that we haven't spoken about so far?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, this innovation curve. It's very
Mm,
exciting to be on it, but it's also you see the spectrum of different views, but also how people are adapting to it. And I think what's really it'd be really interesting to see is how much of the world is really using AI and how they're actually in practice using it.
mm,
So, I mean, the stats are pretty crazy out there. Like, actually, but you may think everyone's using AI. That it's in the the low tens in terms of percentage of people actually using it.
wow.
Within that, like I can't remember the exact number. I think it's like 80% are just using ChatGPT.
Okay.
Most firms roll out Copilot as a standard. So
Mhm.
that's kind of, if you think of a business context, people are used to Copilot. But then I go to conferences or I do speaking engagements, and I ask people, who here has used Claude, or who has used Mistral, or who's used other systems, and people generally are very taken back and like, no, I haven't got to that, I haven't used that. And I think what's interesting is this adoption curve where people are still kind of being dragged along for the ride, but not actually getting access to more interesting ways of how to use AI. And I think you talked about training. I think that's a critical part. And one of my key messages, like, go back to the team and like try something, do a hackathon
Mm,
together, like really spend some time like seeing what you could do if you put your mind to it. And I've seen some great outputs from these types of
mm,
exercises with firms. Because in reality, you will also find there are people in your team who are using it on a personal basis and have a really good understanding and their thoughts
yeah.
about how they could use it. And sometimes they're held back because of the internal processes. And I think it's about obviously putting within a safe environment to use it, but just go and try something, like see what
Mm,
that looks like, see how you suddenly have that kind of aha moment of, wow, I could use this to save time, to make my life a little bit easier.
mm,
And people come back to me and send me messages afterwards like, thank you for that. Like, I wish I did that earlier. I wish I tried, I don't know,
yeah.
like a Lovable to do a website, or Claude Code to just do a quick tool. And it's been a great experience. And I'm going to use this more and more. So I definitely think like it's one of those things, like, don't be left behind. Even if you're
Yeah.
professionally being stuck because you can't use it within your environment, on a personal level, on the weekend, just go get, run a specific query, run some ideas through it, create an app, create a
Mm.
website. It is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I dabble. I'm no expert, but I definitely don't want to get left behind. I think it's the future, and I don't want to be dragged along either. So final question, just out of curiosity. So in the next 5 to 10 years, do you think the real differentiator will be how firms is actually how they're integrating AI as opposed to whether they're using it at all?
I mean, 5 years from now, every firm will have AI native engineers within the firm, and that's not necessarily like tech people. I'll be very
Sure.
clear. I mean, operational people that have dabbled, have experience, have certifications in how to use AI, don't need any coding skills, and they're building internal tools for companies to
Mm,
utilize. Like I already see that happening in certain firms. I think it's going to take a long time for that to be the status quo, mostly because a lot of firms have very unstructured data or very legacy systems. It's very hard for them to actually go ahead and
right.
like make that happen. But I
Mm,
think there'll be this massive shift where we'll see these new jobs and roles come out where the people today who are kind of getting ahead of the curve and like learning a little bit more about how to use AI are become champions within the business, and they'll actually be the people
mm.
who will be building the future apps of the business.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Um, let's wait and see. But thank you so much. Thank you, Arik, for sharing your insights. It's been a really valuable conversation.
No, thank you. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
And thank you to everyone listening. I hope you found this episode valuable as you think about how AI is beginning to reshape onboarding, compliance in general, and decision making across the legal sector. If you found this episode useful, please do share it with colleagues working in the world of nuance, risk, and razor thin judgment calls. And if it's a topic you would like me to consider in the future, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening to the AML Clinic. Until the next time, do stay informed and stay compliant.